Hello, and welcome to Saving People Queering Things, a supernatural podcast. We were previously known as Driver Picks the Podcast, and the episode you're about to listen to was recorded under that name. Though our name has changed as of season 3, our show hasn't changed that much. Our structure and theme-based discussions are the same, and we're so glad you're here. Now, let's get on the road. Hello, and welcome to Driver Picks the Podcast, the show where we talk about ghosts, road trips, and free will through every episode of the TV series Supernatural. Today, we are exploring Season 2, Episode 16, Roadkill, through the theme of peace. I am Abigail, your host. My pronouns are they, them, and joining me today in the co-host chair is KJ from Supernatural Opinions. Welcome back.
Hi. I don't know if I've said this, but my pronouns are she, they.
Yes.
I feel like you know that, but like maybe some people listening to this don't know who I am.
Yes, that's
I feel like I've never said them. That's
exactly what I was going to get you to do next, was introduce yourself with your name and pronouns. And what are you excited for in this episode in a sentence?
This episode is one of my favorites in this season, and this season is one of my favorites as a whole. So I just like this twist. I did not see it coming the first time I watched this episode. It blew my mind a little bit, and even now when I rewatch it and I know how it goes, I just think wow, this is really well done. It's one of those things that I love where all the pieces are there. You can put it together if you're looking for it.
Yeah, it's a compelling episode, start to finish. There's not a lot of fluff in this episode
there's no filler scenes of them eating at a restaurant and making fun of each other or picking up girls at bars or anything like that.
And it feels very horror-y, very it's very genre.
Yeah, this is back to Supernatural's roots. Sam and Dean are on the road, they're hunting a ghost, and that's what they do.
Yep, and there's a twist that reveals significant character things and gives them a big moral quandary. So it's the best of the kind of one-off episodes do that, and I like how this episode does that super interestingly. Yeah, so let's jump into it. We're going to jump into our series recap, the road so far. So far in season 2, John has traded his life for Dean and consequently died at the hands of the Yellow-Eyed Demon. We don't know all of the specifics about what that deal entirely entailed, but we do know the results. There are also more and more special children with strange powers, and some hunters have been trying to kill them all so they don't quote unquote go dark side. John himself told Dean that he had to save Sam or else kill him, something Dean has been carrying around for this whole season but has only recently revealed to Sam. One of the special children that they have encountered, Ava, who also has visions similar to Sam's, has gone missing, her fiance brutally murdered, but they have no leads. Furthermore, the Winchesters are again fully on the radar of the FBI, with an agent, Victor Hendrickson, trying actively to track them down, as he believes they are responsible for a large number of murders, corpse mutilations, and other crimes, which is a very reasonable thing for him to think based on the evidence, we will just say. Furthermore, Meg is also back in play, having crawled out of hell somehow and possessed Sam for a week to cause chaos and further wear on the relationship between the brothers, on Sam's sense of self, and on Dean's resolution to not kill Sam, no matter what John made him promise. These are the tensions that are coming in as we come into this episode, Roadkill, and our 30-second recap.
Some things have changed since the last time I was here. Some plots have developed.
A lot of heavy stuff has happened.
That Meg thing and Hendrickson had not yet happened last time I was here on episode 10.
Yeah, it's been a wild 5 episodes of us finding out what exactly happened when John died. Also, they're encountering multiple threats from multiple angles. And the Meg episode, Born Under a Bad Sign, is really crucial to the development of what decisions will they make to save each other? What decisions will they make to stop evil?
Yeah, if I was Joe, I would not have great confidence in Dean's ability to keep Sam reined in at any point in the future.
No.
I hope Joe was okay.
Yeah. I think John has a really incorrect perception of his boys' brother relationship.
Yeah. On Supernatural Opinions, we've only recorded episodes 1 to 4 of this season. But this is a conversation we've had a couple of times of like, did John actually expect Dean to do it? / if Dean had died, would John have done it?
I think if Dean had died, John absolutely would have done it. Maybe not right away, but I think if we had gotten a few episodes, like if the events of the season play out the same way they do, but John's the one alive and Dean's not, I think by the time we get to like an episode like
I think Croatoan would have, if nothing else.
Croatoan. Yeah, I think by the time we get to Croatoan, I think we have hints of it earlier, but I think by the time we get to Croatoan, John is pulling that trigger.
I don't think Andy also would have walked away from Simon's side.
I don't think any of the special children that they meet would have walked away.
Yikes.
I do think we could see John going maybe not exactly the same route as Gordon, but maybe some similar routes, some similar choices in terms of
what a nightmare of a man.
Yeah, not asking a lot of questions. I can see John making some decisions based on the information that he has and not being willing to change his perception of people, even if they're genuinely not trying to be evil.
Thanks.
But 30-second recap of this episode, which is a one-off.
Yeah.
But thematically ties into the rest of the season. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
So Sam and Dean are looking for a ghost that only appears one night of a year on a highway. When they find her, they realize that the ghost Molly doesn't know that she's died, so they use her as bait to find the ghost of the man that she killed. And Sam and Dean are diametrically opposed on the morality of using her as bait and not telling her what's going on. But at the end of the day, they're big assholes about how they reveal that information. And they're the worst.
Yeah.
I'm big mad about how they handle this.
Yeah, I think there is some really interesting things they're doing, and then when they actually get to the reveal,
I
it's
think
really
that
shitty.
like doing what they do is fine. I just think that the way that they handle the reveal is absolutely like the worst way to
Yeah, terrible.
They don't know how to use words at all.
No, they don't. And it's just not like they have other times when they're better at using words. They're just really bad at it in this instance.
You'd think having lost a few people each now, like that they loved, they'd be a little more sensitive about it.
A little more sympathetic to the fact that like it's, though I did think about the fact that like Dean has also been in this situation that she's in where like he, with the Reaper in 201, where he's told, you have to move on. If you don't move on, you'll become a spirit. And, and so he's been in that exact position and we don't know what he would have done, but
he was pretty harsh on Ghost.
He was pretty harsh on Ghost in this episode, which is again a kind of, some projection. I think some projection going on, maybe possibly.
Just a little.
Okay, I think I'm ready. Get me.
1, 2, 3. Go.
Okay, so the big question of this episode is what happens to ghosts when they can't move on? And that question of that comes up because of this spirit named Molly who accidentally killed someone when she was alive and then was killed herself and who is now trapped every year reliving this horrible situation. Sam and Dean have a number of conversations with her about moving on before they reveal to her that she's a ghost because she doesn't actually know, and then she puts herself to rest ultimately.
That was good. 30 seconds is feeling really short the lot more that you I just when I'm watching like later season episodes now, I'm like, how am I gonna recap this in 30 minutes, let alone in 30 seconds?
Yeah, I think of some episodes it's gonna be really some episodes
have like 3 or 4. It's like sometimes like Cass, Sam, and Dean each have their own plots. Sometimes they'll throw Crowley a whole separate plot, like
yeah, we're still usually in like one
the boys are together. Sometimes it's like Sam and Dean each have a thing going on, but like in like seasons like 9, 10, like sometimes there's like 4 characters all with individual plot lines
that are all important, and sometimes they're all related to the season, and so it's going to become more and more difficult to do this. Maybe at that point we'll just assign each, especially if it's an episode with 2 or 3 people, we'll just assign each person, be like, your recap is about you get to recap Dean's story arc in this episode. You get to recap Sam's, and you get to recap Cass's. We'll make it work.
30 seconds is definitely feeling short when it's like a season carrying episode.
Yeah. So it is now time for us to discuss this episode through our chosen theme. And this week, our theme is peace. So
This sounded really easy and then wasn't that easy, but also like wasn't hard. It was just, it's a deep thought.
it's a deep thought. I wanted to go to really deep stuff with this theme and this episode because I think because I haven't watched this episode in a long time, and watching it in order again, like it really hit me. Like I just this past weekend, I just watched Born Under a Bad Sign for recording a couple of days ago, and watching this one right after that, they hit pretty hard and like emotionally hit pretty hard. And the concept of peace with the brothers when there's like they have so little internal peace going into this situation. And I think that some of the like messiness with which they handle talking to Molly,
and they really kind of switched their positions on how they're handling this. Like for the like way that the show narratively tells it, it doesn't really switch. But when they go back to like show like what Sam did, like the little side conversations that we didn't see the first time, I'm like midway through they just kind of like switch perspective. All of a sudden Dean's for it and Sam's against it, and like when they started it was like Sam's idea in the first place. I'm like, what happened there?
It's a little narratively confusing. Like I wish they had taken more time I think they ran out of time. Like they spend so much time on that setup, and the reveal is so close to the end that we don't get a lot of
the woods. I feel like that they could have done without.
Yeah, we could have gotten the same point without them. They're the least important part of the episode.
I feel like we spent a lot of this episode though, like a good chunk of it in like Molly's perspective.
I think that's what I loved about this episode is that, and where I kind of, my brain went with the theme of peace of like, this episode is told from her perspective and she is experiencing this situation as if it's the first time. She's experienced this like massive disruption to like the peace of like, you know, her relationship and her anniversary and like all these things in the beginning of the episode that they set up. And she's experiencing this huge disruption as if it's the first time, even though
it's the 15th time.
Yeah, she's been reliving this for 15 years. But for her, she's experiencing it like she's never experienced it before. And yeah, I think that was a really smart choice for them to give us an episode where Sam and Dean feel like the secondary characters.
Yeah.
And we see
it's nice to have a breather from their internal, like, even though like it's a show and everything's from like the outside looking in, we do spend a lot of time like in their perspective of things. And this was like a stranger looking in these like two people's lives that we already know what's going on with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we get to see how both sometimes their advice and their conversations are really sympathetic and are really like understanding, and they bring in the things that they know about the supernatural world and the things they know about grief and loss, and they bring that in some really beautiful ways in this episode. But then they also sometimes just are assholes. Like they sometimes are just really callous because their job has made them so used to seeing grief that they've forgotten that like Molly is a real person who's really experiencing this, even if she's a spirit.
Yeah, a means to an end.
No, and she's not a means to an end. And the parts of the episode that are the hardest to watch are when they treat her like a means to an end, when they're, you know, using the fact that she doesn't know to their advantage in the case. And like I get it, they have to take care of Greeley because
who's also like just like an innocent. Greeley is like the villain of this episode, but he's actually like totally a victim too. Like the poor guy was just standing on his own property and got killed.
Yeah
because Molly wasn't paying attention while she was driving. We just covered children shouldn't play with dead things, and on that we said driving's dangerous and you shouldn't do any of the 4 T's while driving. Tears, texting, tipsy, or there was a third T. There was a 4th T.
Yeah, I will say like that scene at the beginning is infuriating because
tired.
Don't tired. Yeah. Don't try and be flirty while you're driving with the driver. Like just it's not necessary.
Driving,
and
it's
like
your responsibility to operate that machinery safely.
Yeah. And if you are the passenger, it is your job to not make the driver's job harder.
Yeah.
It's your job to not distract the driver and make it dangerous for them. So like and that sparks this whole episode. Like everyone's peace gets shattered because
Molly and David were careless and in love and young and just not thinking.
and being like kind of snippy at each other.
Yeah.
At the beginning, like they're just kind of being snippy at each other, and like, you know, that happens, but your solution should maybe not be become
And
a
like
dangerous
minus
driver.
like the romantic context, obviously. But like we see Sam and Dean doing that all the time too. Like they're always arguing with each other or like pulling pranks on each other, or like they have the music up too loud. Like they're not always like they're not practicing proper road safety.
No. In terms of peace,
Right.
I think this episode, I think there's a couple different ways to like see it. Like there's obviously the way of seeing it that's like Sam and Dean are using the fact that she doesn't know. They're using her like lack of peace to facilitate them being able to put Greeley to rest and put her to rest. And then there's the other way, which one of the ways I was seeing it too was that they're also kind of the concept of like accompanying someone on this process towards letting go. And especially I see that with Sam in a couple of the conversations he has with her, because Sam has a number of conversations with her and about, and you know, it's framed in the way that she doesn't know she's dead, so she's coping with the idea of like her husband maybe dying, being dead, and of, you know, this spirit. But Sam is sort of giving her pieces of information, pieces of advice, pieces of like comfort to try and accompany her so that she will get to the point where she can have peace with letting go.
So that when they do the reveal, she like has this like knowledge, I guess.
Yeah, and so that she's more at peace with the decision, because I think they recognize that like her not being at peace is why she's not let go, and it's part of why this cycle has been continuing for 15 years, and she's trapped in this cycle with Greeley because she's not at peace, and also neither is Greeley.
I think that's like something interesting about Dean on the other, like Sam is talking to her a lot about like how ghosts like come to be and like what ghosts deal with and like what their whole deal is. And Dean is very much like ghosts are ghosts, and like some of that like could be like projection from like Dean's experience almost dying and like almost becoming a ghost because he was unwilling to let go. Yeah. But also I think part of it is that like Sam was like, let's just like go with this and see if we can get the job done, and Dean just kind of like went along with it. And I feel like Dean's like, okay, like we're gonna go along with it and we're gonna use this girl as bait, but like I don't want to like act all chummy with her when like we're lying.
Wait, when we know what we're ultimately doing, it's like almost like Dean is trying to be a little more honest in this situation.
Yeah, it's like an honesty from like by like freezing her out a little bit and like not being super friendly, but I think it like to Dean like that's better than lying to her.
Right, then yeah, right. Whereas what Sam's doing is simultaneously lying to her. Like he is legitimately making it easier,
lying by omission.
Yeah, and he's you know, telling her all this, which does accomplish her, you know, working through some of these emotions, but also is the reason Sam's doing it is
feels like sinister in a few ways.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it, because I didn't specifically like super pick up on.
I don't think
that.
he means to be like, I don't, but I think it just kind of is like, could be honest with her and have that conversation without like, you know, having that conversation like as though you're not talking about her.
right and this episode would be very different if they had actually told her from the get-go, like you, and would have in some ways would have maybe given her more opportunity for peace, because she wouldn't have been so distraught about like the things that didn't make sense, like the car being gone, like the fact that they had no idea where her husband was, the fact that like Greeley is going after her very specifically, like there's all of these pieces that she's like, this doesn't make sense, like even if this is a spirit, like why me? And that piece of information they keep from her until the very last minute.
Also want to talk about Greeley's wife who is unnamed and therefore like not really like too much and like totally not really present, like not even like ghostly present in this episode, like the only dead person who's not a ghost in this thing. But like Greeley gets killed by Molly, and then like Mrs. Greeley collects the body and then like goes home and dies by suicide. And no one ever like checks up on her, no one ever finds the body. no one,
It's really
like,
tragic.
they must have like not had a mortgage because no one like takes control of the house or anything. Like the house is just there.
Yeah.
It feels like, you know, when Molly and Grilly have their confrontation later, she's like, I know what happened to your wife. Like she still doesn't know like what's happening. She just still just thinks like he's just chosen her at random to haunt this year.
Yeah.
But she's like, I know what happened to your wife, and he like, but like he was already dead when that happened. Like her peace also got disrupted.
Yeah. Her piece got hugely disrupted,
Yeah.
and she
never really got any like justification for it.
no, she just like saw this horrible thing happen to her husband, and then
Had
was
like
so
lost
upset, was so
her like
distraught.
desire to like live without him. Like
Yeah, lost any semblance of her peace. But what's really interesting and telling is that she isn't there as a spirit.
yeah, she
He
is
actually
not.
does move on, and her husband doesn't. That the nature of his, like, even though in a lot of ways, like her death, like they're both violent deaths, and like in the show we see people who die by like violent car crashes and things like that, and people who die by like suicide, both featuring as
Ghosts.
like we've seen ghosts that are both of those things. And it's really interesting that in this episode the one that doesn't move on is actually the one that had a different sort of, they're just very different kinds of violent deaths. And it, like the element of peace there of like for both of them.
Also thought it was interesting that the Winchesters didn't really want Molly to see that. Like when they discovered the body, they kind of tried to like shield her a little bit. As though like, I don't know if that was just like natural instinct of like, oh, there's a woman here, we don't want her to see a body, or like this is another direct consequence of your actions, like your carelessness,
right?
And like they don't want to add to that burden on her.
Well, and I wonder if they recognize that, like, if because she is a spirit, adding more guilt, adding more regret to her is risky. Because we see that like it doesn't take much sometimes for spirits to tip over from grieving and from lost to vengeful. And like even like Sam says, like Sam describes spirits as like wounded animals.
Like not
he says,
in control.
They're in so much he says they're in so much pain that they lash out. And when we're thinking about like Molly, like I wonder if some of the reason they're so careful with what they say to her, and when even Dean's a little bit detached, is because they're afraid of her also becoming that. That her peace will turn it, her like lack of peace will go from being sort of confusion to being violence. Because which is what happened to Greeley. Like Greeley, we don't know anything about him. We don't have any, and in the evidence we have from like the scrapbook and stuff, everything tells us that he does like not seem normal like man. He's not a violent person. He's not a violent person in life. A lot of spirits we've seen in the show, like I think of like the serial killer in No Exit, or like a number of other spirits where they were like violent people. And then they were violent spirits. But like Greeley wasn't violent in life.
He's just a dude living in the middle of nowhere with his wife, like,
which like asks that question of like, what about a lack of peace and a lack of an ability to move on? Like how living with that for so long without any support.
He literally says like when Molly's like, hurting me is not gonna like change anything, it's not gonna bring your wife back. I think he says like this is the only thing that I have. Like
he says hurting you is all I have left.
That's a lot.
Which is a lot. And it's like it's so tragic. Like Greeley and Molly are both victims in this episode. And they both, and even like Sam says, she deserves to be put to rest. Like and they're saying that even with the lack of knowledge of what happens after.
That was interesting. I think that Dean wasn't immediately like, yes, we should like take this poor woman's body and like put her to rest. Like that wasn't his reaction in that situation.
Which I wonder if it's because they're going, not out of a we won't do this, but out of a like we have a bigger priority.
They're on a time limit.
The active spirit and the time limit going, we can come back for this body, but presumably she's not a spirit, so this is not like top priority right now. But
Molly's like very preoccupied with her husband, almost to the point it's borderline annoying. I feel like that's just very much like 2006.
Yeah, she kind of has one personality trait,
Yeah.
which is like kind of unfortunate, like because she's such a good character too. Like the questions she's asking are so
I hope
interesting.
that's like a side effect of being dead and being a
I
ghost, because like when we see other ghosts later, like they do get very like focused on certain aspects of like their deaths or whatever is like keeping them
yeah,
ghostly.
fixation is a
Yeah.
really key element of like ghosts in the
Yeah.
supernatural
So
universe.
I hope that like when she was alive, she had more going on for her than David, who seems like, you know, the average white male.
Yeah, they
He
seem
seems
like
lovely,
they're
but like he just seems like a dude who lives in the suburbs. And
yeah, and you know, they're not we don't really get to know. It is interesting that you point that out because we don't really get to know much about her, but yet I found her to be one of, and I think this is also kudos to the actor, who's just very compelling in this role. Like she plays the emotions of this like discovery of this experience so
yeah.
compellingly. Like her confusion, her sense of being lost, her sense of like desperation, all kind of come through just in a lot of her like facial expressions and the way she delivers her lines. And
but yeah, like every spare minute of silence is her being like talking about David and like, what if that's the last thing that I said to him and we need to find him. Like she's just very focused on that. And like I think that like then when we like learn the truth about Molly not being alive, it really like comes back to those conversations with Sam about like spirits holding on too tight and like replaying the same loops over and over. And
yeah, and replaying the like guilt and fear of, you know, I've lost this person. What if I've lost this person? What if I've lost this person and this is the last thing I said to them? What if because of the circumstances I can never have peace about this? Like what if I'll always, because that's what, like when she says, you know, what if that's the last thing I said to him, that she's saying, you know, what if I'll never
that
be
really
able to
like when you
that?
rewatch hits hard because you know that it is, and it was
Yeah.
the last thing that she got to say to him.
Yeah, reinterpreting the rest of the episode once you like the previous stuff, you know that she is already dead. Her everything she's finding out about the supernatural world, which is just sort of like all of like Sam and Dean are having to disrupt even like she's been living in this loop,
Yeah,
which is really really bad and really really horrible for her, but it's also been secure, it's also been like consistent, and then they have to like disrupt that thing to like start telling her about spirits and about ghosts and trying to like get her to the point where she can realize her own reality, and that's like super disruptive.
And like even in that loop, like stuck in that loop, like she doesn't know, so she, as long as she never finds David, which she can't, like she can't prove that he's not alive and that they're not going to see each other again over and over and over again. Like
you can hold on to hope, which is, I mean, like that maybe comes to another point of like she's holding on to hope, and so she's been living in a loop of holding on to hope, and that gets shattered for her. And it's interesting comparing that to the conversation Sam and Dean have at the end, where Sam says, you know, you think she's really going to a better place, and Dean says, I guess we'll never know, not until we take the plunge ourselves, huh? And Sam says, it doesn't really matter, Dean. Hope's kind of the whole point.
Yeah, as long as they hope it's
like,
better, then
hope's kind of the whole point. Like, which I think is really cool that at this point in the show we don't know what happens to spirits. Like we're gonna find out a lot more of like what happens to spirits and what happens to ghosts like later on in the show, but at this point I think that it does something really interesting for the characterization of Sam and Dean that they don't know, because the
show does get pretty explicit in the theology of life and death.
Yeah,
they're always kind of expanding on it, but like back in season 2 they don't know, but they are starting to lay a lot of foreshadowing, like Houses of the Holy is coming up pretty soon, I think, right? Like
Houses of the Holy is very soon, and that's going to be starting to answer some of those questions. But I think it's really, I think what it allows in these early seasons is for us to see them grapple with like, we put spirits to rest, but we don't really know what that means. We're operating off of like hope and faith that that's a good thing. We're like, you know, Sam says, Dad used to say it was like death for ghosts. Like the truth is we don't know, not for sure. Guess that's why we all hold on to life so hard. We're all just scared of the unknown. And I think that is like characteristic of like both Sam and Dean at this point, is they're both very scared of the unknown. Because they don't know. Even with John, like they
don't know.
They don't fully know
where he is or
where he is, they don't know if he's at peace, and they don't know ultimately if peace is even possible. They're just hoping that you put a spirit to rest and they're actually at rest.
There was something really, I think, powerful in the fact that Sam and Dean are trying to supply Molly with this sense of peace and like it's okay to move on, but at the same time they don't sugarcoat or lie when like she asks them questions like that. They're honest and they say they don't know. And I think that's an interesting choice for them to make as characters. And I think a powerful one as well.
Yeah, which I think in terms of peace is a really powerful one, because if we think about peace not as like a guarantee of like everything's perfect, everything's all right, you have all the like peace, like having internal peace is not about like having all of the answers, but it is about like honestly confronting the things you do know and then having hope for the things you don't. And I also really appreciate that they tell her the truth. And they also, say, like Sam says to her, he says, what, like when she's going, I've got to go talk to him. And Sam says, what do you have to tell him? That you love him, that you're sorry? Like he already knows that.
Oh, that was one of my favorite lines.
I like, yeah, it's so, I think it's so compassionate because it's going, you can trust, you can have peace in the relationship you had with this person. You can have peace that like you knew him, he knew you, he knew that you loved him.
Yeah.
He knew he would have known 15 years ago when this tragedy happened, he would have known that you were sorry. You don't have to earn that. You don't have to go back and prove it. You can like just be at peace with that.
Yeah.
You can live with that. And like you can hold the grief and the like regret of your decisions that led to Greeley's death, that led to these horrible things. But you also at some point have to forgive. You have to have peace with yourself and you have to be able to move on.
And like, I don't agree with anything that Sam and Dean did in regards to the reveal. I just think they handled it really bad. But I think one thing that they did well when they realized that they were screwing up was they kind of course corrected a little bit when Molly wanted to go in there. Because David is at peace. Like he's moved on. He's had 15 years to, he probably still like, if you like, it seemed like when we saw like the little flash, like he still cared and like loved Molly, but like she'd been dead for 15 years and he had gotten married again and he was living his own life and life moved on for him. And like Molly could have gone in there and disrupted that, and they said no, like you need to let him have that peace. Like he said his goodbyes already.
Yeah, he's done the work to earn that peace, and I'm sure that took time.
I'm sure that was terrible for him. Like I'm sure he had the same issues of like, like the last thing that they kind of did was like have a little fight and like he was distracting her and then like they got in this horrible accident. Like
I'm sure he also had to grapple with the am I responsible for this accident? I'm responsible for these deaths. And he has managed to come to peace about it, and a peace that honors, hopefully honors his relationship with Molly, but also honors the fact that he is still alive and still has life to live. And it looks like he's really done that from what we know. And that's kind of, it's cool to see. It's like, I think that's really meaningful. And I do appreciate that Sam and Dean help that not end with another disruption of peace. Because so often, like these episodes, when someone finds out about the supernatural, it's this like moment where their peace in the way the world works is forever disrupted. And I think of like characters who will never be the same after that, and it's not Sam and Dean's fault, but it is sort of like often on them. They're often the ones that are like, we're gonna have to tell you the truth,
and they don't always think about it either. Like
no, but sometimes they do it really shitty.
Like I always think about that kid Michael from the motel that helped them with the Striga. Like that kid was like 10 and they like let him be bait for a monster and like told him monsters were real and he just has to live like that forever.
And there's I like that they accompany Molly in this process of her coming to peace and they walk with her as she says her goodbyes, and she does go into the sun, visually, quite literally at the end of the episode. It's a nice touch in this episode that they actually get some, like, this episode has more closure than a lot of episodes.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that we've had a lot of questions and not a lot of answers in terms of like the logistics of spirits and stuff like that.
Yeah, I feel like, like the shadow of a Reaper would have been like helpful here.
Yeah, but I think a Reaper comes when I don't know, which is whenever we've seen spirits like disappear.
Yeah.
Right. But whenever we've seen spirits, well, that's also the thing is like we we'll talk about this when we get to lore. We'll talk about this when we get to lore because it's a little bit inconsistent with what the Reaper told Dean in 201 about if you become a spirit.
Yeah.
Because she says if you become a spirit, that's it. You made your choice. You don't get to move on.
That's not true.
That's clearly not true. We've seen that a few times. Anyway, we'll talk about that in lore. Is there any other notes about like peace in the episode that you wanted to make?
No, I mean, like we didn't like get like too specific with the quotes, but I feel like we don't need to. I feel like we talked about everything I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, me too. So we're going to move into our going meta segment. We're tracking lore, Bechdel test, pop culture, and things like that. So first we have our death counter. For this episode, all of the deaths have like happened prior to the episode actually starting. But we do have three. Yeah, we have three, I think, that we would kind of consider. Yeah. And that would be Greeley, his wife, and Molly. The Bechdel test.
That's a no.
It's a no.
Greeley's wife doesn't even have a name. Like she's literally not even named.
Yeah. And it's an episode with just a very small amount of characters. Like most of the time we have just Sam.
It's
Dean,
a really
Molly.
Closed episode. Like
so I'm less like I wish that we
there's
passed the Bechdel test. But I'm not surprised and not as upset this episode.
There's not even really like chatter at the beginning or end of the episode, like from the boys or anything about anything else going on. Like when we see
there's
them,
no research or anything else.
Yeah, like they're in a car talking about the case, and then they stumble upon Molly, and then like they have like a quick little conversation about like is Molly going to a better place, but they don't talk about anything else that they've been dealing with this season at all.
No, it's very closed off, and I think even just like the filming choices, like the fact that it's really dark, most of it takes place in the woods, a lot of the camera angles are really narrow, like everything in this episode is meant to like bring us into a really intimate, like it's a really intimate episode.
Yes.
Which I think is what and it's from Molly's, and it's so much from Molly's perspective. So like Molly doesn't care about what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Like Molly, none of that's about her. So just we only get what's important to like her story. Just kind of just different from what we see.
Yeah. Just doesn't lend itself to the Bechdel test.
No.
How is the Bechdel test going this season? We have not passed once this season in 4 episodes. We're 4 for 0.
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think we've only passed maybe once or twice at this point.
I feel like no exit
episodes. I think no exit passed, but we were like, it passes. Kind of. I think that was the only one that we were like solid.
I was really in season 1 like, oh, like once Joe and Ellen are here, it'll start passing all the time. That's not the experience we're having so far.
No, because they're still mostly talking about the dudes, even when they're talking. Or they're talking to the dudes.
Episode with you, and I don't think we've passed it any of those things.
Yeah. Here we are. So next we have our lore check. We talked a little bit about this already. Yeah. We don't know what happens to spirits after the bones are burned. We do sort of know about the existence of hell from like the exorcising of demons that we've done so far, but we have no real concept of like how hell works.
If everybody goes there or what.
Or like what determines whether, we don't know if there's like a heaven,
or if it's like a Greek underworld situation where everybody, just goes to different sections.
Who knows? We literally know nothing,
we
and
don't
they
know anything.
Freely actually express that in this episode.
Which is the one thing almost better, I think, than like just constantly contradicting depending what they need.
Yeah, I like prefer an episode like this where it feels honest to the rest of the show, where they're like, we don't know what happens. I'm like, yes, you don't know what happens. That is a thing you should consider with all of your decisions. You don't know what happens.
It becomes necessary later in the show as the show goes on. But I think in these early seasons, they were a little bit more like religion free because they hadn't made a decision on that. And then like once they introduce the like very like Judeo-Christian God theology, then they're kind of like stuck in that.
Yeah. yeah, it changes it takes away the mystery and adds different moral questions.
Yeah.
Whereas I think I like these early seasons. Like I like the stuff in the later seasons once they have those explicitly asked, but I also like this early stuff because they're more concerned. It's more about what do they do while they're on
It
Earth.
feels more authentic too. Like even like, you know, in a world where there are monsters and stuff, like people just still have questions that they can't answer, and like no one can answer because once you're dead. Like
and hunters are like hunters who know about the supernatural still have that quandary of like we have to make decisions about like how to live our lives on Earth without really knowing. Like we kill monsters, but we don't actually even know what happens to monsters when they die. We don't know what happens to people when they die. Like
we don't know that we don't want monsters here.
Yeah, we just know that like we don't want harm caused on Earth. We don't want like to see harm caused to people on Earth.
Which I think that's also like Dean in this episode, like is like ghosts are ghosts and we kill them, like because we don't know, and I don't have the like mental capacity to stay up at night thinking about it. Like
yeah,
I got other things going on to worry about.
Yeah, and they have to trust that like putting spirits to rest, whether they're angry spirits or just lost spirits, they have to trust that like that is better than the risking the vengeful spirits. That
I do like that it feels like a difference. I do feel a bit conflicted about it in this particular episode. Like there's a difference between like moving on and like having your bones burned. Like that feels very different.
Yes.
It's represented very differently. Like what happens to Molly feels very peaceful in contrast to what happens to Greeley.
Yeah.
And I feel a little conflicted about Greeley, you know. It feels like he's gonna suffer wherever he goes, and like the only victim of his like antics as a ghost is Molly, who's already dead. Like
is Molly who's responsible for his death.
Yeah.
So like it's really morally complicated.
It's not like he's like out like murdering children, like living children or anything like that.
Though they did say that there have been a number of accidents.
It almost felt like more that was Molly than anything else, but
yeah, it's a little unclear.
The people
and I have to go back and look at the transcript.
That all like reported seeing Molly, like a woman running into the road.
But Molly's being chased by Greeley.
So it's unclear, like the people that didn't survive those accidents, if they like just like accidents, like, you know, like the impact. It was like something happened to them once they tried to help Molly.
I'm inclined to believe that, and with the symmetry of this episode, that those people are dying because of accidents. Like it's not Greeley. Greeley's not targeting
like
these people
they
and
try to avoid hitting Molly, and they do exactly what Molly did, and they go flying off the road.
Yeah, I think I'm more inclined to believe that that's the symmetry that's happening.
In which case, Molly's responsible for human, like loss of human life as a ghost, and Greeley's not.
Which I think it is kind of sad in this episode that they have to Greeley doesn't get the chance to like voluntarily choose to move on. He doesn't get the chance to like choose peaceful moving on. He is like violently ejected from the spirit world into wherever else he goes.
Ejected. That is accurate to what happens.
There's a lot of spirits where that happens.
Very painful looking compared to some of the other. Like a lot of times they burn the bones and it's like an instantaneous up in flames. That did not happen to Mr. Greeley.
No, and it seems like comparatively
he suffered
to some of the
for
other
a minute
spirits.
there, like
and comparatively to other much worse, much more violent spirits, he gets it really. It's really shitty for him.
Felt pretty justified in his haunting. And he's haunting another ghost, so.
And he feels like the epitome of that like wounded animal that's lashing out because he got stuck. Like he feels like the kind of spirit that got stuck.
Yeah, I feel
like I almost think of like the Reaper going to him.
Hurt Sam and Dean. But like I feel like the average person, like the other 15 years, the other like I think they said like 12 accidents had occurred in 15 years. I feel like the other like 12 people that were in those accidents like weren't interfering to the same level that Sam and Dean Winchester were, so I feel like they probably would have been fine.
Well, exactly, and I wonder like too about so like in terms of lore, like we know when Dean was about to die, the Reaper came to him and was like, hey, you have a choice. You're dying, you have a choice. You can go with me or you can stay and become a spirit and you might eventually become vengeful. And I wonder if like someone like Greeley in that position with not much time to choose.
I wish we knew how much time there was to choose, because I feel like his wife then dying immediately would make that decision different.
Yeah, and I also wonder, like, if how explicit the choice
Yeah.
is, which is the question of this episode. Like, I wonder how explicit the choice is. You know, when we see Dean have that choice,
Pretty.
it's very explicit. She tells him
But
everything,
Dean also
but she
like
also knows he knows the
yeah.
supernatural.
Dean unravels. He figures out exactly who she is, and
I think for a lot of spirits, it's maybe more of a subtle thing. It's
yeah.
maybe more of a like, how much do they cling to life, and or how much do they come to peace in the moment of dying? How much do they come to peace?
And if
with
his
it?
wife was that distraught about his death that she then took her own life, like,
and he thought maybe I can stay.
yeah,
He thought maybe
I
can
could
fight
see
to
that
stay.
happening, and then she dies, and he gets worse. Like,
and then that's what triggers the wounded ant. That's what triggers him into being
just from like ghost to like vengeful spirit.
Oh, that's actually so sad. And that like makes me think about like so many of the spirits that we meet, about like how much choice did they actually have?
Yeah, because like
how much did they actually know
really
what was
just tried to like set Dean up there, like.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because she was also manipulating his sense of reality to get him to move on. And
yeah,
we don't know that reapers are not like morally, they're kind of morally ambiguous. They just are like doing their job. They're not.
Yeah, it's a transport you where you're going, wherever that may be, or not, if you are choosing not to go.
We don't know that their motives are pure. They're just utilitarian. So like, they're not trying to accompany someone along the way to death in a peaceful way necessarily. We don't know that they are.
Yeah, it seems like from what we know of Tessa, like there is a level of steering you in the direction of moving on, so they can perform their job. But if you have a good sense that you're going to hell, like maybe you're a little more resistant to it than that. And then how much choice do you have?
Yeah. And at what point does the Reaper just wash their hands and go, well, you're fighting me too much. I'm not going to fight with you. I'm just going to let you stay. I'm going to let you become what you become.
Again, we should have learned some more about Greeley's wife, because she's not here.
Yeah, she moves on presumably she moves on immediately.
Yeah, unless she was just haunting that house and they didn't notice because they had brought a ghost with them. That could have occurred.
Who knows? I mean, it seems unlikely, but it's possible. They miss stuff sometimes. Yeah. We definitely know that. They have to come back to cases every once in a while. Anything else lore related?
I feel like that was it. I feel like we talked that like way more than expected.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to be thinking differently about
ghosts,
spirits in some of these other episodes. I'm going to be sadder about it, and I'm going to be more complex about it, and I appreciate that. In terms of locations, there's not really any filming locations of note, because it's mostly filmed outside in the forest and kind of by the highway.
Yeah, nothing super recognizable. Canadian highway really, in the woods.
Really yep, and they use a lot of the same kind of Fraser Valley highways for a lot of shots. Yeah. It's dark for the episode pretty much entirely. I was curious about what the like suburb area at the end was, but I couldn't figure out where exactly that suburb is located.
It could honestly
specific look.
Yeah,
it looks like it could be Langley, but which they film in
probably
quite often,
Langley.
But I'm not excited. Probably it looks like a couple of the like developments in Langley that would have been fairly new at that time, in 2007.
Yeah.
But who knows? Speculation. And in terms of the story, it takes place in Nevada. That's literally the only information we get.
Yeah.
We know it's a highway in Nevada. Yeah. Which, it's not really important. In terms of pop culture, there is a few references. Yeah. There's a fun Ghostbusters reference again.
Yeah, we love a Ghostbusters reference.
Yeah. We just like them to be sprinkled in very regularly.
We literally made Meredith watch Ghostbusters.
It's important like background viewing to understand Supernatural. It's also just so good. We love Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters is good, and I like when the show makes reference to it.
I like that Molly, that's it, Molly. And again, because it's an episode from her perspective, I like that we get her making that reference, her being like, so you're like Ghostbusters. Dean makes a Alice in Wonderland reference, which is another thing that we also get referenced every once in a while. Less often than Ghostbusters, but he says, follow the creepy brick road, which is fun.
Isn't that Dorothy? Wizard of Oz? Sorry,
Wizard of Oz. That's what I meant.
You said Alice in Wonderland, and I was like, yes, absolutely.
Wizard of Oz, which I did know. I'm not mixing those two up. I was picturing the yellow brick road, and
because Oz is like a thing in Supernatural also. Like I
think that's why my brain was like, we've done both on Supernatural in later seasons. Both of those stories are referenced. and used in interesting ways. Anyway, this episode is just a reference. And then there's a Ghost Whisperer reference from Dean.
Interesting choice to say J Love Hewitt instead of Jennifer Love Hewitt.
Dean like nicknaming things is so funny because he does this whenever he makes references. He often like shortens the reference, or like they're very, very specific.
Oh yeah, very specific.
Like he's drawing on specific cultural reference and background that obviously he knows Sam would know, but I think
he's made like another Ghost Whisperer reference before. It's not his first one.
Yeah, in Asylum.
Yeah,
he made that the other reference.
And like Ghost Whisperer, I think was still on, like, or like was pretty recent.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, I'm curious now. Let's find out. Yeah, it was still Ghost Whisperer was still running, so it would have been current to them. Maybe. And Dean, we know Dean likes these kinds of things, like Dean watching Ghost Whisperer
Dean is
in motels.
Watching Ghost Whisperer. He's watching Veronica Mars because he later makes a Veronica Mars reference, and that was on from like 2004 to 2007.
Oh, we love that. we love the idea of that. Dean in motel rooms watching
all the things that I love.
All the things that, amazing. Lastly, in going meta, we have our gaydar, sexuality, and gender connections in this episode. We talked a little bit already about how we wish Molly was given a bit more characterization.
Yeah. David's new wife looks uncomfortably like Molly. I don't know if you
I hadn't consciously noticed that, but
I mean, we don't see very much of her. We see her like through a window, so it's not like we see like a good look at her. Like she's like in a bathrobe, like making herself a coffee, like kind of mostly
right, we just kind of see her side profile,
side profile and back of the head only. But I did notice she was like approximately the same like size as Molly.
Well, I mean, that's a interesting casting choice, and it's very supernatural in their like.
I don't think it was intentional. I think
blurry wife syndrome. They have blurry wife syndrome.
I don't think that they were trying to like imply that like David like replace her or anything, but I just like they look a little bit too much like.
Right, you're like,
they could have got like a redhead or something. just drastically different.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe like a ponytail, just like a different hairstyle.
Also, they didn't necessarily even need to, I don't know. Like, it's cool that they had, like, they could have implied, like, referenced the fact that he was married.
No, I didn't really need to see her at all. Like, or like, he could have just never gotten remarried and still, like, moved on with his life and been fine.
Exactly. The idea that he had moving on implies that he had to have, like, met someone else is.
On the other hand, it had also been 15 years and people are social, and 15 years is a long time to go. Presumably if you've married once, like you get like widowed young.
You like will have the desire to be married, and moving on could look like many things, and I don't think there's really anything
not really
else
there's no side talk, there's no like side like bar pickup scene or like bartender to flirt with them or anything. Like there's just nothing happening.
No, and the two references that Dean makes when he like is like calling Sam something, yes, both of those references are like female, but it's not for the purposes of like him calling Sam a girl or something like that, which we've seen in other episodes. In these episodes, these references to J Love Hewitt, and the reference to Haley Joel, both of those are references to the fact that Sam is sympathetic to ghosts and to their plight, and it's not about gender at all. I think
it's about
just happens to be those female characters. So
which is a genre thing more than anything else.
So I appreciate that those aren't being turned into a weird, misogynistic comments, that they're just about Sam being the way
I'm glad
he is.
The show is moving away from that slightly, at least for this episode.
It's nice to not have to unpack a
so bad about
misogyny. So that ends our going meta segment for this week, and our last segment today is our theme song of the episode. So we're creating little episode mixtapes for every single episode and collecting them into one giant season 2 playlist. So do you have a
I do. I really wanted a Taylor Swift song. So I went looking through the discography. And I settled on Happiness from her Evermore album.
Oh, okay. Okay, say why.
Because it's a song that's called Happiness but sounds sad, and it's like about, two people like being together, but then later like moving on to have like relationships, and they're able to be happy in those relationships because of the experiences that they had together, but like they don't get to stay together. They're not right for each other.
Ooh, that is really interesting when we think about Molly.
Yeah, I was thinking about Molly and David.
Yeah. That is also going to be along the same lines as the song I've chosen. Because we're also thinking about Molly, because I think this episode, we want to honor this episode being about Molly
not the
primarily and not the boys. And and I think it's strong for that reason. The song I've chosen is Dearly Departed by Shaky Graves. It has the line, "You and I both know the house is haunted. You and I both know the ghost is me."
Oh, Shaky Graves is a great band name.
Shaky Graves, yeah, they have some good songs that make me think of Supernatural quite often. And this song I think of in terms of Supernatural, in terms of a number of characters thematically in some of the later seasons. But you know, spoiler alert, you know, Dean Cass season 13, widower work.
I have another song thing to there was a song that was a theme in this episode.
Oh yes, this song utilizes a theme song.
Yeah, House of the Rising Sun.
Which is a brilliant
we heard it
song,
like
and I love it.
3 or 4 times in this episode. It was not like a one-time thing. It was a couple of times we heard it in this episode.
Yeah, it's used to signify that Greeley is close.
Yeah,
and that he is, and it's interesting because it's this song, you know,
it's a very like, it has like this very distinctive guitar riff at the start. Like it's very, like, when you hear it, you recognize it instantly. Like it's one everybody knows. It sounds and it's kind of sad.
It sounds kind of like mournful. It's this song about, you know, being ruined,
and like wasted potential, and
gambling, this idea of gambling, this idea of I think it's a really interesting one to connect
morality.
to Greeley and morality, like this question of choice and destiny, and like what happens to you and what choices that you make that determine your destiny, but also what choices other people make, because, you know, Greeley is a victim of other people's choices, and this song is kind of like haunting in that sense. So I think that would be a third edition. I think that combination of those 3 songs, a good combination for this episode, thematically.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like the show used that song multiple times.
Yeah, I love when Supernatural uses music thematically. Like they don't. I wish they did more, because I love music as a thematic, like as a way of like showing theme without.
They have 327 episodes, and so like when I hear a song that I know I've heard them use before, I'm always like, okay, where did they use it before, and what's the connection between that moment and this moment? And usually it's a pretty like subtle but like interesting connection.
Because they reuse a lot of the same kind of classic rock songs, but those are often dealing with these sort of themes of family. And one thing on the other Driver Picks the Podcast show, they had talked about in their season 2 episode 1 discussion, they talked about like Dean's theme, that the theme music that is specifically connected to Dean and a lot of the big emotional like pivot moments that he makes within the show. And they talked a little bit about the first use of that in season 2.
We were too busy being mad at John to talk about that.
So were we. Like I missed that entirely. So I wanted to like shout out the fact that they talked about it, and talked about it. Jamie or Beth talked about its significance, and kind of revealed that to Jamie, who's new to the show. And it's one of those evidences that now I'm really paying attention to, is like when that theme comes up, because it's often symbolizing a pivot or a pivotal decision for Dean. But I love when they do it with other songs. There's a lot of really, really interesting music choices, and we love to see them. Is there anything else you wanted to say about this episode?
No, I'm just still blown away by how well done this episode is. I think it was really like a tight episode. They didn't have any of those extra scenes, like we said. And first time you watch it, you get hit with that switch like 3/4 of the way through, and it's like, oh my god. But then when you go back and watch it, all the little clues are there, but they're not too obvious. You can still enjoy it on a rewatch and like have fun picking up the little clues along the way instead. It's so well done.
I think I loved getting to experience it knowing the twist, but being able to take more of the like thematic like punch and resonance.
It would be a hard one to do this kind of analysis on the first time. I feel like you would get so distracted by that, like if you didn't know it was coming.
Yeah, because that reveal is such a big deal. But I appreciate, I appreciate getting to talk about it with someone who has seen it before and who can explore those bigger themes that are happening. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, always a pleasure. So that brings us to the end of our show. You can subscribe to Driver Picks the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and you can come talk to us on Discord or social media and follow us for bonus content and all that fun stuff. The link to all of that is in the show notes. Thank you, KJ, for being here today again. All of KJ's social media and their Supernatural podcast, Supernatural Opinions, is going to be linked in the episode description.
Yeah. So excited. We're officially into season 2 now. Like at the time of recording, we're dropping episode 1 at midnight.
Oh, it's so exciting. It's just a few hours away now. I'm excited to listen. I'm excited to hear your season 2 launch.
Good. Meredith and Emmy and I had a blast.
It's a good crew. It's a good crew for that episode.
There's a lot of John Winchester hate, which, we're always down for.
Always down for. And season 2, episode 1 is like one of the last times we really get to hone in on it. So.
To his face.
To his face, yes. It's one of the last ones where it's an explicit part of the episode. Which
good. I was not going to survive much longer.
No, I was getting a little tired about having to talk about it every week.
Me too. My blood.
I was like, we have to talk about it every week.
This
is not good for me to have to do this every week. It's good that now we get some reprieve. We get some episodes where John doesn't come up at all, and it's great.
Somehow he still comes up even when he's not present.
Oh, he comes up a lot still, but it's less, slightly less. Thank you all for coming along for the ride, and we wish you a peaceful road until we meet again. Next week, we will be discussing season 2, episode 17, Heart, through the theme of progress.
Oh, that's a good one too.
A note to our listeners. This episode was recorded prior to our season 3 name change, where we went from Driver Picks the podcast to Saving People, Queering Things. For all of our new social media platforms, visit queeringthingspodcast.com.